Good morning, friends. Welcome to Gyan channel. Today, in basic principles of mass communication, we will be discussing about various communication theories. So let's start with what is communication theory. The communication theory is a simple statement proposed by S.F. Scudder that all living beings communicate through different communication methods. Every living organism communicates to another living organism of his kind through a unique communication method. For example, animals communicate with each other but use different sounds. Humans interact with each other with the help of different words, letters, symbols, pictures, or gestures. The need for communication is present in every living being, and without communication, we would be like bricks lying around without movement and life. So, the framework of communication theory. The framework is mechanical. Mechanical, this point says that communication is a mechanical process that passes from one location to another. It is a well established fact that one end is the sender from which the communication originates and the receiver is where the communication terminates. The psychological. According to this view, communication is considered a flow of feelings, thoughts, and information from the sender to the receiver. However, a psychological viewpoint also believes that communication flows from one point to the other, that is, from the sender to the receiver. Then is social. Social is a process. It involves more than one person trying to communicate with another person. The social point of view says that communication is dependent on the content or message, not only what but also how a message is communicated essential. Next is systematic. This viewpoint says that communication is unique and dependent on the interpretation of the individual. Receiver is responsible for deriving his conclusion irrespective of the meaning with which the sender has sent. Critical. It says that communication is a medium in which a person can express himself or exert authority in a group of people. Now we talk about hypodermic needle theory. We also call it as a bullet theory and magic bullet theory. The hypodermic needle theory, also known as hypodermic syringe model, transmission belt theory, or magic bullet theory, or bullet theory, is a model of communication suggesting that an intended message is directly received and wholly accepted by the receiver. The concept behind this is that the magic bullet and hypodermic needle theories originate from Harold Laswell's 1927 book, Propaganda Technique in the World War. This theory was based on early observations of the effect of mass media. People were assumed to be uniformly controlled by their biological based instincts and that they react more or less uniformly to whatever stimuli came along. This theory reflects the fear of mass media being used for massive propaganda as during World War II, when it was thought to have direct and powerful influence upon audiences. The media were seen as manipulating audiences at will. This theory assumes that message reaches every eye and ear in the same way as bullet hits target, brings about the same changes of thought and behavior in the entire audience. Most famous incident often cited as an example for the hypodermic needle model was the 1938 broadcast of the War of the Worlds and the subsequent reaction of widespread panic among American mass audience. However, this incident actually sparked the research movement led by Paul Lazarsfeld and Herta Herzog that would disprove the magic bullet or hypodermic needle theory. Hadley Cantrill managed to show that reactions to the broadcast were in fact diverse and were largely determined by situational and attitudinal attributes of the listeners. Now we talk about the criticism on this theory. If one believes that bullet theory, one has to maintain that the audience is made up of enormous undifferentiated mass of humanity and that each member of the audience would react identically of the mass mediated messages. If that is so, thousands of millions of people who receive messages by watching horror movies or about dreadful events like war, drugs, etc., would ultimately become potential victims of mass media. But researchers and even our own experiences with mass media do not support this view of mass audience, and this jeopardizes the validity of hypodermic or bullet theory. Next, we talk about psychological or individual difference theory. As per Trevor James, variations are deviations from the average of the group with respect to the mental or physical characters occurring in the individual member of the group or individual differences. As per Good CV, the variation or deviations among individuals is regard to a single characteristics or a number of characteristics, those differences which in their totality distinguish one individual from another. As per Skinner, today we think of individual differences as including any measurable aspect of the total personality. As per Woodward, Thares, and Marquis DG, individual differences are found in all psychological characteristics, physical, mental abilities, knowledge, habit, personality, and character traits. The type of individual differences are physical differences, intellectual differences, social differences, emotional differences, ethical differences, cultural differences, and racial differences. Individual differences are mainly due to four factors: mind, wisdom, pride, and intellect. Spranger has classified personalities into six types: theoretical, economic, aesthetic, social, political, and religious. Individual difference theory or attitude change theory of mass communication proposes that individuals respond differently to the mass media according to their psychological needs. The theory gives importance to individual audiences and states that individuals' values, needs, beliefs, and attitudes play a major role in how they react to use media. It's an important theory based on psychological approach to understand mass media effects. A category of communication research generally known as attitude change research has focused on the phenomenon that different individuals may receive the same message but act on it quite differently. This research is grouped under the heading of selectivity. The studies of American researcher Carl Howard in particular concluded that people are very selective in how they use media. In the topics they expose themselves to, in how they interpret information, and in how they retain information obtained through the media. Thus, the theory points out that people are selective about their use of media. Most important aspect of selectivity are the theories of selective exposure, selective perception, and selective retention. Now we come to selective exposure theory. Selective exposure means that people expose themselves and access only those communications which are in accordance with their established belief and convictions. They tend to avoid those messages which are against their point of view. People seek out not only topics of interest in them, but more importantly, viewpoints which they expect to agree. Thus, they use the term media to reinforce existing biases. Next is selective perception theory. Selective perception observes that people often interpret facts to suit their existing biases. Once the individuals have selectively exposed themselves to the messages in accordance with the preference, they tend read into the message whatever suits their needs. This process is called selective perception. Selective perception implies that the audience members tend to misinterpret media messages according to their psychological predisposition. Then selective retention theory. Selective retention notes that people remember messages that support their opinion longer than they remember opposing messages, which often unconsciously are forgotten and set aside. As with selective exposure and selective perception, selective retention is likely to reinforce existing beliefs and attitudes. Such tendencies make it less likely that the media can play a solo role in changing attitudes and behavior. Melvin E.L.D. Floor and Sandra Ball have concluded from the vast available content individual members of the audience selectively tend to interpret and retain messages, particularly if they are related to their interest, consistent, and their attitude, beliefs, and values. To sum up, individual differences theory of mass communication proposes that individuals respond differently to the mass media according to their psychological needs, and that individuals consume the mass media to satisfy their needs. The need may be for information, integrative, effective, or escapist. Now come to some personal influence theory. The personal influence theory was derived from the classic study of US presidential elections in 1940 by Paul Lazarsfeld, Bernard Wilson, and Hazel Goddard. The two-step flow of information hypothesis was derived from the People's Choice study conducted in 1944 by them. They hoped to find that media directly affected the audience opinions, but surprised to find that this was not the case. Personal contacts were were mentioned more frequently than radio or newspapers as affecting voting preferences. The formal discussions with political opinion leaders helped the voters finalize their voting preferences. The personal influence or two-step theory therefore contradicts the hypodermic needle or magic bullet theory. Now come to two-step flow theory. Paul Lazarsfeld and Elihu Katz are the founders of the two-step theory, and in their book Personal Influence 1955 is the handbook of the functional theory. The two-step theory claims that majority of people are indirectly influenced and informed by the media through opinion leaders in the society. Majority of people form their opinion based on the analysis and interpretation of media messages. Opinion leaders are influential and well-informed personalities who, when exposed to a specific media content, interpret it and form their own opinion. These opinion leaders have access to elite media sources as opposed to general mainstream media. The two-step flow of communication model hypothesizes that ideas flow from mass media to opinion leaders and from them to a wider population. The two-step flow of information personal influence means the process intervening between media direct message and the audience's reaction. These opinion leaders are similar to ones they influence interests, personality, and socio-economic status. They hold a respected position in the society who relies on them for ideas, information, and guidance. They influence others to change their attitudes and opinions. Now we talk about multi-step flow theory. It gave way to the multi-step flow theory. Two-step theory actually gave the way to the multi-step flow theory. It was observed that the audience influence from the media can be multidirectional, and it is not necessarily downwards but can be upwards or even backwards to the media as well. Two-step flow led to the change in name basically because of the opinion leaders who are more than just a second hand. This caused the description multidirectional because the multi-step had to do with more than one opinion leader. They could be 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 people. Many a time the information reaching the audience is altogether different from the original piece of information. The multi-step flow is also called diffusion of innovations theory, which gives it a new dimension and understanding. This predicts that media and interpersonal contacts provide information and influence opinion and judgment. Its focus is on the media letting out information and in a point where the audience may be thrown in imbalance because the message of information is not a consistency with their culture or belief. The role of the opinion leaders come to play whereby they engage in face-to-face explanation with the people either to advise them or help them get cognition. Now we talk about cognitive dissonance theory. Cognitive dissonance is a theory of psychology that translates into thought conflict. First proposed by US psychologist Lynn Fostinger in the 1950s, the theory seeks to explain how people reduce psychological discomfort and achieve emotional equilibrium in the face of inconsistent beliefs or behaviors. It rests on the premise that people desire to view themselves as rational and uniform in both thought and action. Therefore, they consciously choose how they respond to information or behavior that challenges their way of thinking. Though cognitive dissonance theory was controversial at first, it is now one of the most analyzed and accepted theories of both psychology and communication. Cognitive dissonance theory contains two basic hypotheses. The first hypothesis states that people who experience psychological discomfort arising from cognitive conflict will attempt to reduce the discomfort and achieve resonance on inner harmony. Hestinger proposed three ways humans do this. Firstly, minimize the importance of dissonant thought. Secondly, outweigh the dissonant thought with consistent thought. And lastly, incorporate the dissonant thought into one's current belief system. For example, consider a college student. He regularly drives while intoxicated. Upon hearing that drinking and driving interests the student might argue that he never drives more than a mile from the local bar. Consider how much he is saving on taxi fare by driving himself home, except that his behavior is dangerous and stop driving drunk. The second hypothesis said that people all who experience dissonance will try to avoid it in the future by shunning challenges situations and limiting information to that which affirms their current beliefs. This hypothesis explains in part why many national news outlets frame events along a political slant. People want to see reality in a way that supports their cognition, and many organizations have found ways to capitalize on this desire. The internet has also proven effective in solidifying people's attitudes. Blogs and discussion forums allow humans to every persuasion to find affirmation for their opinion and habits. In fact, the richer a society becomes in knowledge, the more people limit their sources of information. Scientists refer to this phenomenon as selective exposure. Cognitive dissonance has the potential to alter people's behavior. Salespeople, social activists, politicians, ministers, and advertisers try to create rather than help people avoid cognitive dissonance by confronting consumers with information that forces them to make a decision. Hallmark probably devised one of the best dissonance including campaigns in modern memory. The company's slogan is "When you care enough to send the very best." It implies that those who choose to buy another brand of greeting card don't really care about their friends and family. Dissonance that targets people's insecurities is actually the most persuasive. Paradigms illustrating the power of cognitive dissonance. Free choice paradigm. The people who choose between two desirable outcomes tend to view the rejected outcome less favorably and the chosen outcome more favorably, and they did therefore making their decision. Belief disconfirmation. Dissonance that fails to change a person's belief causes that person to spread her belief to others to gain support for her position. Induced compliance. Behaviors that offer little or no reward for compliance cause people to seek internal justification for their participation, which makes them more likely to permanently adopt said behaviors. Next is effort justification. People who are persuaded to put more effort towards achieving a goal exaggerate the attractiveness of the goal to justify their effort. Now, sociological theories of mass communication. Sociological approach to communication theory is based on the assumption that there exists a definite relationship between mass communication and social change. First is cultivation theory, that is also called passive communication theory. This theory was developed by George Grabner in 1960s while studying the impact of television industry. It suggests that people who are regularly exposed to media over long periods of time are more likely to perceive the world's social realities as they are presented by the media by they consume, which in turn affects their attitudes and behaviors. This theory is based on the assumption that mass media have subtle effects on audiences. who unknowingly absorb the dominant symbols, images, messages, media. It calls the cultivation of dominant image pattern. According to the theory, along persistent exposure of TV is capable to cultivation common beliefs about the world. The message of television do not portray reality in society. Repeated exposure to such distortions leads to development of particularly belief about the world, and these beliefs get reinforced once they are developed. Next is agenda setting theory. The term was coined by Maxwell McCombs and Donald Elsa in 1972 in the context of election campaign where participants seek to convince the voters about the party's most important issues. Agenda setting theory maintains that the media are more successful in telling people what is to think about than telling them what to think. Over a period of time, according to the theory, the very priorities accorded by media to issues, the public priorities as well. McQueen, 1983, argued that the evidence is insufficient to show a causal connection between the various issues agendas of the media and the public. The usage and gratification theory. Usage and gratification theory arose out of the studies which shifted their focus from what media do the people that people do with the media. The question asked is how do people use the mass media and why? Usage approach assumes the audiences are active and willingly expose themselves to media, and that the most potent of mass media content cannot influence an individual who has no use in the environment he lives. The term gratification refers to the reward and satisfaction experienced by the audiences after the use of media. Division in 1959 has shown that many research findings make more sense of communications are interpreted as a link between man and his environment. He suggests that communication effects can be explained in terms of the role they play in enabling people to bring about more satisfactory relations between themselves and the world around them. Three distinct groups of usage and gratification studies can be distinguished. First of these groups conducts inquiries into the range of satisfaction derived from mass media material. Second group looks at the social and environmental circumstances that are responsible for people turning into the media in the first place. The third looks at the needs audience members are attempting to satisfy. Next is dependency theory. Melvin DeFleur and Sandra Roll-Rocket have proposed an integrated dependency theory of mass communication in which they recognize various psychological and social factors that prevent the media from exercising arbitrary control over their audiences. DeFleur and Roll-Rocket describe like this. Mass media not only lack arbitrary influence powers but their personal lack of freedom to engage in arbitrary communication behavior. Both the media and their audiences are integral part of their society. The surrounding socio-culture context provides controls and constraints on the nature of media messages and affects the audiences. With this, we come to the end of this chapter. Thank you. Good day.